Hello, everybody. My name is Ivanir, and I live in the Norwegian mountains. I I'm a Norwegian, but I'm also Jewish. So I would like to tell you some Jewish stories from a grandmother, Golde Sheer, that came from Lithuania here to Norway at the end of the 18th century or the 19th century. Sorry, and I found her stories in a book written by her grandchild, Eva Scheer. She wrote down the everyday stories of the Jewish Stetls in um, in a place in Lithuania called Sameland. But I think that those Jews and the Lithuanian Jews in Kaunas had a lot of contact and a lot of things in common. So, but before I start with the stories, I would like to sing a Norwegian song because we are in the mountains now. I live in the mountains of Norway and I'm surrounded by nature. And this song is a very, very old song from people living in the mountains in the summer, women milking their goats and making cheese and taking down to the valley. And it was a hard life and they had to work hard because all the men, they were down in the valley and they were cutting grass for the winter and mending the buildings and so on. So the women, they were often alone up in the mountains, milking the goats and taking care, looking after them and protecting them against wild animals and so on. So this song is called Kjerringa med staven. And the reason why I want to sing this song is because it's connected to the story, the Jewish story that I will tell afterwards, because that's about a woman who also have goats and they go up in the mountains. So both these sides live very strongly in me, so I would like to connect them. So, Kjerringa med staven høyt opp i Hakkadalen. 8 potter rømme, 4 merker smør, så skinna Kari Ola hadde før. Kjerringa med staven høyt opp i Hakkadalen. Kjerringa med sekken hoppa over bekken, og så datt hun uti, og så ble hun blaut, og så gikk hun hjem og kokte seg litt grøt. Kjerringa med sekken hoppa over bekken. Kjerringa hun stridde, så kom en fyr og fridde. Vil du være kjerring, skal jeg være mann. Vil du koke kaffe, skal jeg bære vann. Kjerringa hun stridde, så kom en fyr og fridde. Hei la di do di da da, didli datten do di da da, doodli da di 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 didli di di do, doodli datten di di didli datten do. Kjerringa med staven høyt opp i Hakkadalen. Son. Once upon a time, in a village very much like this village, but a bit further from here, there was a small farm. And on this farm, there lived a couple, Esther and Jacob. Now, Jacob, he was a religious man. He was following the long traditions of religion, and he was recitating the Torah day long. He would stand and sway with the Torah in his hands and say out his prayer while he was circling around with his body. The people in the village were sure that if somebody would come to paradise, it would be him, because no one was more strong in his faith than Jacob. So Esther, his wife, she had to do all the work on the farm. She had a few goats, she had the garden, and she had the house, of course. She prepared dinner for her husband. And in those days, the women, they were not allowed to learn to read and write. But you know, Esther, she was a curious woman, and she was observing her husband Jankele when he was reading and writing, and she would observe and she would learn from him. And in secret, she was learning how to read and write. And she would always carry a little pencil with her in the pocket and a little piece of paper that she could use and write down things that she saw and she wanted to remember when she was out working on the farm. So they lived from the cheese and the milk that she sold in the market. And exactly this day that I'm going to tell you about, the goats came home as usual. And when she let them in, she saw that there was a kind of glow in their coats that she hadn't seen before. She let them in, and when she was about to milk them, she noticed that their udders were so full of milk. Those old goats, how could they give so much milk? And the smell of the milk was sweeter than usual. When she was finished, she poured up some milk in a glass and she tasted it. Mmm. Mmm. This milk was something different. It was truly divine. Ah, she had to go and tell Jacob. So she walked into the room of Jacob. Jacob, he was in the middle of his prayer, and he was in a deep meditation. He was swaying and swaying, and he was feeling the divine light surrounding him. And it was like if the gates of Eden, of the Garden of Eden, was opening in front of him. When he suddenly heard his name called out, Jacob! And when he opened the eyes, he looked straight into a glass of milk. He got furious. He pushed out the glass of the hand of his wife and he said, "How dare you disturb me in my prayers?" The milk went all over the room. "Do you know where I was?" he said to his wife, Esther. "No," said Esther. "I was deep in my prayers, and I saw the gates of the Garden of Eden opening in front of me, and then you come with a glass of goat's milk? What is this?" "I've told you not to disturb me when I am in my prayers. You can call me when dinner is ready." Golde took a cloth and dried up all the milk. It was spread all over the room, and she promised herself not to disturb him again. The next morning, it was time to go to the market. She had a lot of cheese, and now she also had a lot of milk that she could share. And when she came down to the market, the other women, they were wondering, "Hey, Esther, how come you have so much milk? Have you got some new goats?" And Esther said, "No, I don't know what happened, but suddenly the goats came home and the milk, it was so much, and you have to taste this milk." And they all tasted her milk and they said, where does your goat go to eat? Maybe we can bring our goats there too." And Esther said, "I don't know." "Yeah, but why don't you follow them?" And when Esther came home that evening, she decided that the next day she would follow the goats to find out where they were. So she milked her goats and she didn't tell anything to her husband, Jacob. And the next morning, she took a woolen shawl after she had been milking them, and she followed them out through the gate and up to the mountains. And she was surprised to see where they went, because the further they went, the less grass there was. So she was thinking, how come they walk here? But they went further and further up to the hill. And she was following as good as she could, because she was quite small, but She was strong. Then suddenly she noticed that one of the goats, the bell goats, the first goat, disappeared behind the bush, and soon the other followed. And when she came to the bush, she opened them, and there she saw a hole in the mountain. It was just big enough to fit in a goat. And because Esther, she was not big, she bent down and she crawled into that hole. And she heard the bells in front of her, but it was all dark, and she felt drops of water on her head and on her face. But she carried on. She was using both arms and legs to crawl through the mountain. And soon it was all dark. But there, suddenly, there were reflections of light. And now she could see the goat, and she could see where the light came from. It came from a hole in the rock. And the goats, they were all jumping out through the hole. And when she came there, she took her arms and she pushed herself through the opening. And when she looked around, she couldn't believe what she saw. Never had she seen such green meadows of juicy grass. And there were fruit trees of all kinds. There were apples, pears, plums, peaches, cherries. And the smell of the thousands of flowers in all colors. What kind of place was this? The goats, they were now grazing and jumping around and playing in the grass. And she looked around and she saw a path, a tiny path, and she decided to follow it. And she followed it until it came to a humble hut of wood. Carefully, she knocked at the door, and she heard a voice inside, "Come in." She opened the door, and it was such a strong light in that house, and she couldn't even look at what was in there. But she understood who it was. It was the female divine mother, Shekinah, and she fell to the floor, and she bowed down and she said, oops, there's something here. And she said, "Oh, Shekinah, is that you?" And Shekinah, she said, "I have been waiting for you, Esther. Please sit down. Would you like to have a cup of tea?" And Esther, she got up and she didn't dare to look at this divine mother. And she sat down and she drank the tea. And she asked, "What is this place that I have come to here?" And Shekinah said, "You have come to the Garden of Eden." The Garden of Eden? You know, my husband Jacob, he really wants to come here. Can I go and get him? I can show him the way. And Shekinah said, "I'm sorry, Esther. Once you come here, you cannot go back." "Yeah, but what about the goats?" With the goats, there is another story. So, Esther, she was thinking. She was a little sad, but then she had an idea. "How about, can I write a message?" And then Shekinah, she was smiling and she said, "Sure," because she knew that Esther had been learning to write and read, and she didn't mind. And so Esther, she took out her little pencil and she wrote the message. "Dear Jacob, I am in the Garden of Eden. If you want to come, follow the goats. They know the way. Yours, Esther." Then she rolled the little paper to a tiny, tiny, tiny little roll, and she took a woolen thread of her shawl, and she tied it around, and she walked out into the meadows and found the bell goat, and then she tied it She tied it to the bell of the goat firmly. Now, Jacob, he was as usual swaying and doing his prayer. And he was wondering why he wasn't called down for dinner. Well, he thought, maybe she's busy. I will do another prayer, and he continued. But soon his stomach started to speak, and he in fact got really hungry. It was well over midday, and he had had nothing to eat all day. So he decided to go down into the kitchen and see maybe she had prepared something for him there. But there was nothing prepared for him in the kitchen. And he looked for Esther, but she was not to be found. He looked outside in the garden. He went to the neighbors and asked if someone had seen her, but no one had seen Esther. In the evening, when she still hadn't come home, they all went out and searched for her around the area, but she was not to be found. So Jacob, he understood that he had to milk all the goats that evening. And he milked the goats, and he thought, those old goats, they are giving so much milk. And next morning, he had to milk them again before he let them out. And as the day went by and she still didn't come back, he understood when all the buckets were full that he had to go to the markets and sell the milk. And when he came to the market, all the people in the market, they were saying, Jacob, are you here selling milk? It's not a job for you. Where is Esther? When will she come back? But he told them, I don't know. And he thought, yeah, it's true. I should be doing my prayers. I shouldn't be doing this job. So he decided to sell the goats to the butcher. This was not a job for him. The butcher looked at the goats and he said, it's a pity to slaughter such nice goats. Are you sure? But he insisted, so the butcher bought them, and he did a good job. Soon some of them were hanging from their back legs in the roof, and at last there was only the bell goat left. And as he was taking off the bell, he noticed a little roll of paper fastened to the bell. He took his knife, cut it off, and threw it into a clean corner of the room. And then he did a good job with the bell goat, and soon all the goats were hanging there. Then he washed his hands. He took his spectacles. He went to the paper roll and he opened it carefully, and he read, Dear Jacob, I am in the Garden of Eden. If you want to come, follow the goats. They know the way. Yours, Esther. So, this was the story of Esther and the goats in the Garden of Eden. Now the sun is coming in my face, so I will move a little bit. Let me see. I think I have to move a little bit this way. And so, okay. The next story is a story about the shoemaker. Dai da da di da 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 dai 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 da dai da da di da 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 dai da dai da da di da 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 dai da dai dai da di da da dai dai da da di da di da 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 dai da dai da 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 di da 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 dai dai da da di da 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 dai 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 da di da da dai. Once upon a time there was a shoemaker who loved to sing. And he was singing all day long, from early morning to late at night. All the people in the village loved to listen to him, and they would often stand outside his little house and enjoy the hammer on the shoes in rhythm with the song. Dai da da di da 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 dai da dai da dai da 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 dai da dai da da di da 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 dai da dai dai da di da da dai. There was only one man who didn't like this song, and that was the rich merchant on the other side of the street. He liked to go to bed early, and he liked to sleep long in the morning. But every time he was going to bed, he was held awake by the annoying song from the shoemaker's house, and every morning he woke up to the same annoying sound. He decided to go and talk to him. So he walked over on the other side of the street. He knocked on the shoemaker's door. And the shoemaker said, "Come in." And he was surprised to see the rich merchant there. And he said, "Come, Jankele, sit down. Would you like to have a cup of tea?" "No, thank you," said the rich merchant. "I came here to ask you to stop singing so long days." I'm sorry, I cannot stop singing. I have 10 children and a wife, and they need new clothes and food and this and that, and women, they need this and that and the other. I have to work all days if I will to support them all, to survive and have a good life. And the rich merchant, he understood that he would come no way with his prayers. So he went back home. But could he sleep? No. He was lying awake. He was thinking and thinking. He was thinking even in his dreams of how could he make this shoemaker stop singing so long days. And it was one of these sleepless nights that he had an idea. So the next morning, he got dressed. He went to open a drawer. He took out a purse, a little bag of leather, and he filled it up with silver coins. He took on his coat, he put it inside his coat, and happy with himself, he walked over on the other side of the street. He knocked at the door of the shoemaker's house. And the shoemaker, he was busy singing away and hammering on one of the shoes he was repairing. And he said, "Come in." And he was surprised to see Jankele there again. And he said, "Jankele, come in. Please sit down. Have a cup of tea this time." And he called for his wife, "Feige, Feige, bring us some tea, will you?" They sat down. And they talked. They talked about the weather, and they talked about the storms, and they talked about what will happen in the winter, and if they had enough wood, and all these kind of everyday conversations. But finally, they came to a point where there was nothing more to talk about. And the rich merchant, he said, "Well, I have been thinking, and I think it is not good for you to work such long days." And the shoemaker said, "It's okay. I'm feeling well, but I don't think it is good for your health." "Nothing is wrong with me," said the shoemaker. "But listen, I have decided to give you a gift." And he opened his coat and he took out the bag of silver coins. And he said, "I have decided to give you this like a mitzvah. And he gave it to the shoemaker. And the shoemaker opened the bag. Oh no, I cannot receive this. And he wanted to give it back to the merchant. But the merchant pushed it back and he said, you cannot refuse a mitzvah. So please receive it. It is a gift. Exactly when Fegi, his wife, came in, the merchant had closed the door behind him, and she found her husband, the shoemaker, looking still down in the bag. What are you looking at, husband? She said. See for yourself, he said to her. And she looked into the bag of silver coins and she said, where did you get these from? And he said, I got it from the rich merchant on the other side of the street. Yeah, but you couldn't accept such a gift. He said it was a mitzvah, and you know you cannot refuse a mitzvah. And the shoemaker's wife, Fegele, she started to dream. Oh, with this money, we can make a bigger house. Oh, and I can buy a lamp that can shine all over the room that we have. And I can buy new cups and new clothes to all the children. And she was planning and planning and planning. But then her husband said, stop. We have to find a good place to hide this money. Men, she said, and she ran out and she told all her neighbors. But the shoemaker, he was taking the bag of silver coins, and he was thinking and thinking, where should he hide them? And then he had an idea. Maybe I can hide them behind the food in the kitchen cupboard. And so he went into the kitchen, he opened the cupboard, he moved some of the jars in the back, and he put the bag of coins there. He closed the cupboard door and he went back to his shoemaker workshop. He took up a shoe and he took up the hammer and he just started to sing when he suddenly remembered that there is loads of mice in the cupboard. So he ran into the kitchen. He opened the door to the cupboard. He took out the bag of coins and he looked around, and then he saw the chimney, and there was a little hatch on the chimney, a little door with a little room. So he took the bag of coins and put it in there and closed it carefully and went back into his workshop. But he hadn't walked far. He hadn't even reached the door of the workshop when he remembered, if we make a fire, the bag of money, it can burn. So he walked back into the kitchen. He took out the bag of coins and he was thinking, where can I hide them? And then he remembered, the cellar. It's a good idea. So he opened the hatch in the floor and he walked down the stairs into the cellar. And there in the stone wall, there was exactly room for a bag of coins. So he put it there and he walked up the stairs. But he hadn't even come up the stairs when he started thinking of the rats that sometimes were living in the cellar. So he went back down, he took out the bag of coins, and he came back up again. And then he looked at the roof. He got a ladder. He put it up. He climbed up the ladder. And there were big beams going all over the roof. So he took the bag of coins and he stretched himself up and put the coins on one of the big beams. And then he climbed down the ladder. Then he remembered the magpies. The magpies and all the other animals and the the bats and all kinds of birds would fly in there. So he ran up the ladder. He took down the bag of coins and he walked around the house inside and outside all day, but there was nowhere he could hide the money. So that night he put the bag of coins under his pillow. But do you think he got to sleep? No. All his dreams was about people that came in through the window and wanted to steal the money, and he would wake up in the middle of the night and feel if the money was there still under his pillow. And it was there, and he would fall asleep again. And day after day passed, and people came to get the shoes that they had delivered to him to repair. And they were asking, when will the shoes be ready? And all he said was, I'm sorry, come back in 2 weeks. And they were thinking, he who has always been so precise with his deliveries. After a couple of weeks, the shoemaker got big black marks around his eyes, and he became miserable. He still hadn't found a good place to hide his money. And his wife had to tiptoe around the house. There was no more song in the shoemaker house. And it was one of these mornings when she came in with a cup of tea, and she said to her husband, would you like to have a cup of tea? And he screamed at her and he shouted at her and he said, get out of my way. And when he saw how sad she got, he knew what to do. This couldn't continue. So he got up out of the bed. He put his clothes on. He opened his cupboard, took his coat on. He took the bag of coins, put it inside his coat, and walked out of the house. Fegele was looking out of the window, and she was thinking, maybe he will buy me a shawl, or maybe a ring, or maybe he will buy me something. But then she saw that he walked over on the other side of the street and knocked on the rich merchant's door. And the rich merchant, he was now still in bed. He was happy. He had had his peace for a couple of weeks now, and he was feeling great, sleeping away when he heard the knock on the door. Who could that be at this time of the day? But he stood up, and he was surprised to see the shoemaker there. So, what can I help you with? He said. And the shoemaker said, I just came to give you this. And he opened his coat, and he took out the bag of coins, and he gave it to the rich merchant. And he said, I would rather have my song. And home he went to his wife, and she was happily receiving him, and he was singing all the way. Dai da da di da 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 dai 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 da dai da 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 dai da dai da da di da 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 dai 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 da da di da da dai dai da da di da di da 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 dai da dai da 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 dai dai da da di da 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 dai 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 da di da da dai. Some. And this was the stories that I had to share with you today. Thank you.